In the labyrinth of history, there are stories so powerful, yet so buried, they almost fade into obscurity. Meet a forgotten scientist whose groundbreaking discoveries could have reshaped medicine as we know it, but instead, his name was erased from the pages of history. How did one man's life and work get overshadowed by those who claimed credit? And why does it matter today, when the echoes of his contribution still shape the way we understand life-saving treatments? Stick with us as we uncover the truth behind this lost genius and the legacy he left behind. Before we dive into this captivating story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Trust me, you don't want to miss what we've uncovered. Let's get started. In the vast annals of scientific history, there are names that echo through time, celebrated for their discoveries that have transformed the world. But then there are the forgotten ones, scientists whose work was monumental, yet their names have slipped into oblivion. Today we dive into the story of one such individual, a brilliant mind whose contributions to medicine were nothing short of revolutionary, but whose legacy was all but erased. Imagine a world where a medical breakthrough could save millions, a discovery that could change the course of human health forever. This is the story of a man who, despite his groundbreaking work, became nothing more than a whisper in the corridors of history. His research laid the foundation for some of the most crucial advancements in medicine, yet his name was stripped away by the very system he helped shape. How did this happen? Was it the result of a world unwilling to accept change, or something darker at play? The scientists' ideas were ahead of their time, so much so that many in the scientific community couldn't see their value. But what followed was not just ignorance. His contributions were systematically overshadowed, stolen, and rewritten by those in power. As we unravel this forgotten story, we ask, why did this happen? What does it mean for us today as we stand on the shoulders of giants, some of whom have been deliberately hidden from our view? Join us as we uncover the incredible story of a scientist whose name was lost to history, yet whose discoveries still resonate in the medical world today. Imagine a time when the medical world was on the brink of a revolution, but no one knew it. In a dusty lab, under dim light, our forgotten scientist was about to make a discovery so groundbreaking that it would change the very nature of medicine. What was this radical discovery that slipped through the cracks of history? It all began with a simple yet profound idea. Our scientist understood the body in ways few others did. He saw connections where others saw only chaos. He discovered a method that would eventually become a cornerstone of modern medicine, a technique so ahead of its time that it seemed almost like science fiction. His work focused on the human body's ability to heal itself, harnessing the power of natural processes to combat disease. But instead of being heralded as a genius, he faced skepticism, ridicule, and, ultimately, betrayal. His discovery would later form the basis of treatments that we rely on today, from organ transplants to immune therapies. But at the time, it was too controversial, too radical for the establishment to accept. Why was this scientist's discovery ignored for so long? What made it so difficult for people to see its true potential? The answer lies in the nature of change. Scientific progress is rarely a smooth journey. It's often blocked by those in power who fear what might be lost when old ideas are challenged. And here, in the case of our scientist, the medical community's unwillingness to accept new theories led to the suppression of his work. As the years passed, His discovery was overshadowed, stolen, and repackaged by others who took credit for what was rightfully his. But the impact of his work still reverberates through the medical field today. Every great mind has a story, a journey of triumphs and tragedies that shapes their path. For our forgotten scientist, the beginning was filled with promise. His early years were marked by incredible breakthroughs and a vision that outshone his peers. But like many trailblazers, his road to recognition was never straightforward. He was a young man full of ambition, eager to make his mark on the world of medicine. With an insatiable curiosity, he delved into the human body's mysteries, unearthing secrets that many thought were beyond reach. His early work was met with awe. Fellow scientists recognized his genius and hailed his ideas as revolutionary. But success in the early days wasn't enough to shield him from the harsh realities of his field. Behind the applause, there was always an undercurrent of doubt. As he presented his findings, not everyone welcomed his radical approach. Established experts, entrenched in their traditional methods, began to feel threatened by his unconventional ideas. They mocked his theories, dismissing them as outlandish. Despite the groundbreaking nature of his work, they undermined him at every turn, making his career a battleground of constant struggle. The deeper tragedy, however, was personal. As his professional battles intensified, so did his personal turmoil. The scientist faced immense pressure from all sides: societal expectations, the weight of competing interests, and the relentless need to prove his worth. His mental health began to deteriorate, and in a cruel twist, his greatest triumphs were marred by emotional and physical strain. This chapter in his life, filled with both promise and heartache, would eventually set the stage for the ultimate betrayal. Despite all his achievements, the scientific world would soon turn its back on him. Behind every discovery is a person, and behind this forgotten scientist was a man who was both extraordinary and deeply flawed. To understand why his name was erased from history, we must look beyond his scientific brilliance and dive into the heart of who he was. He wasn't the stereotypical aloof genius often portrayed in history books. In fact, he was remarkably humble and approachable, deeply committed to his work, and driven by a genuine desire to help people. His compassion for the suffering of others pushed him to challenge the status quo. He was relentless in his pursuit of knowledge, often at the expense of his own well-being. His lab was a sanctuary, but also a prison, where the line between work and life blurred, leaving him isolated from those who might have supported him. Yet it was precisely his idealism that would both fuel his greatest achievements and set the stage for his downfall. He believed in the power of his discoveries, not just for fame or fortune, but for the greater good. He saw himself as a servant to science, a humble messenger carrying knowledge that could save lives. But this very selflessness made him vulnerable to those who would exploit his genius for their own gain. In his personal relationships, the weight of his work often drove a wedge between him and those who loved him. His intense focus on his research meant that family and friendships were neglected. As he became more consumed by the battles in the scientific community, his ability to trust others eroded. This isolation would prove to be one of his greatest tragedies, for it left him open to the very betrayal that would strip him of his rightful place in history. But what made him truly remarkable wasn't just his brilliance, it was his unwavering commitment to doing the right thing, even when the world wasn't ready for it. Every story has a turning point, and for our forgotten scientist, that moment came when his discoveries, once celebrated, began to be systematically erased. The world of science is competitive, but it's also supposed to be a place of collaboration and recognition. Yet, for this man, recognition would soon turn into exclusion. The first signs of his erasure came quietly, like whispers in the background of his life's work. At first, it was small, subtle dismissals by colleagues, an omission here, a slight there. But as his theories began to challenge the established norms of medicine, the pressure mounted. His peers, threatened by the implications of his work, began to discredit him publicly. They ridiculed his ideas in journals, calling them too experimental or unproven. The most heartbreaking part of this erasure wasn't just the academic snubs, it was the deliberate manipulation of his research. As his work gained traction, powerful figures in the medical community began to take credit for his discoveries. They cherry-picked parts of his research, reframed it as their own, and reaped the accolades that should have been his. But how did they manage to erase someone so influential? The answer lies in the power dynamics of academia. Success isn't just about having good ideas. It's about who controls the narrative, who has the power to validate or invalidate that work. And in the case of our scientist, those with more power use their influence to erase his legacy, rewriting the story in their own favor. The scientist, meanwhile, continued to toil in obscurity, unaware of the battle being fought behind his back. His name would fade from the history books, but his work would live on, repackaged, repurposed, and credited to others. As time passed, the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Our forgotten scientist's legacy was no longer just ignored. It was actively stolen. His discoveries, his research, his life's work, everything that had once been his, was now the property of those who had no claim to it. They didn't just erase his name, they replaced it with theirs, turning a once recognized genius into a shadow. The most painful part? These individuals weren't just opportunists. Many of them were respected figures in the scientific community, people who should have known better. They took his ideas and rebranded them as their own, presenting them to the world as breakthroughs they had discovered or perfected. They reaped the rewards, the accolades, the grants, the recognition, while the true scientist languished in obscurity. How did this happen? It was a combination of timing, power, and the uncomfortable truth that history often favors those with influence over those with ideas. As the scientist struggled to make his case, others with more resources, more connections, and more political clout were able to claim ownership of the research. It wasn't just about the science. It was about who could claim it and who could control the narrative. The erasure was complete. The scientist's name was swept aside, and the legacy of his work was claimed by those who had no right to it. Yet, his ideas lived on, woven into the fabric of modern medicine. The techniques and methods that he pioneered were used in hospitals, research labs, and universities, but they were now attributed to others. The world had forgotten the man behind the science, but the science itself remained. Despite being forgotten, the contributions of our lost scientist remained embedded in the very fabric of modern medicine. The research he pioneered, which had been dismissed or stolen, would later serve as the foundation for some of the most crucial advancements in medical science. Ironically, though his name was erased, his legacy lived on in the very treatments and technologies that saved countless lives. His discovery about the body's ability to heal itself and his work on immune system mechanisms became the backbone of treatments that are used worldwide today. From organ transplants to breakthroughs in immunology, the scientists' work was quietly integrated into the systems that doctors and researchers around the world rely on. But his name? That was buried beneath the achievements of others who took credit for what they had never truly discovered. What makes this even more striking is the way his work quietly revolutionized how we understand the human body. The very concept of harnessing the body's immune response to treat disease, something that seems so common today, was once a radical idea, one that required immense courage to propose and even more to put into practice. It's a concept that today's healthcare systems rely on heavily, yet few know the true origins of these practices. So, why is this important? Because it highlights an uncomfortable truth. History doesn't always reward the true pioneers. Sometimes the science lives on, but the individuals behind it are lost to time. In a world that praises the heroes of today, we often forget the unsung ones, the visionaries whose work shaped the world, even if their names were never written in the history books. Decades passed before the world began to take a second look at the lost scientist's work. Slowly, like a long-forgotten truth clawing its way to the surface, the brilliance of his contribution started to be recognized. It wasn't a grand moment of discovery, but rather a quiet, persistent re-evaluation by the medical community that had long overlooked him. The first signs of his rediscovery came from young researchers who, looking at the work of those who had taken credit for his findings, started to ask the right questions. How did these ideas emerge? Who originally proposed them? As they dug deeper into the history of the science they had taken for granted, they unearthed evidence of the original scientist's pivotal role. It wasn't long before academic papers, once filled with references to other pioneers, began to acknowledge his research. His name was whispered again, though it was still overshadowed by the decades of misattribution. But in scientific circles, things started to shift. Journals and textbooks began to include references to the lost scientist's contributions. His work was being validated not by a single individual or organization, but by an entire field that had once dismissed him. While this recognition was overdue, it was still bittersweet. By the time his name began to resurface, many of the scientists who had stolen his work were long gone, their reputations cemented by their claimed discoveries. The true scientist never lived to see this vindication, but his family, and those who still believed in his genius, took solace in the slow but steady reclamation of his legacy. As the years pass, his name continues to gain ground, slowly becoming a staple in the scientific discussions where it once was forgotten. Yet, the fight for true recognition of who he was and what he truly contributed remains an ongoing effort. The rediscovery of the forgotten scientist's work was only the beginning of a long and ongoing battle to restore his rightful place in history. Though the medical community had started to acknowledge his contributions, the true fight for justice was still far from over. A name reclaimed in research papers doesn't erase the years of erasure, nor does it rewrite the wrongs that were done. This fight for justice has come in many forms. Advocacy groups, determined to shed light on the forgotten figures in science, began pushing for public acknowledgement of the scientist's contributions. These efforts have involved petitioning institutions to honor him, demanding that his name be included in the history books, and lobbying for formal recognition in the very places that had once overlooked or even deliberately erased him. Families and descendants of the scientist also became vocal advocates, using their position to keep his memory alive. They collaborated with historians, scientists, and journalists, piecing together the true story of his life and work. This was not just about restoring a name, it was about restoring dignity, recognizing the sacrifices he made, and ensuring that his work was never forgotten again. But this fight is far from simple. The academic and scientific communities still grapple with the legacy of those who wronged him. To this day, some of the individuals who took credit for his work have not been held accountable. Their names remain attached to the discoveries that were never theirs to claim, leaving an air of unresolved injustice hanging over the entire field. As new generations of scientists take up the mantle of correcting history, the fight for this forgotten scientist's rightful place in history continues. His legacy, though slow to return, is being restored. But the battle for full justice, the acknowledgement of his name as the true pioneer, remains. At first glance, the story of a forgotten scientist might seem like just another chapter in the endless parade of unsung heroes throughout history. But this is a story that holds deep relevance today. It speaks to the very heart of how progress is made, and how fragile that progress can be when it's built on the backs of those who are never truly recognized for their contributions. The story of our forgotten scientist matters not just because of the discoveries he made, but because it illuminates the larger dynamics at play within the scientific community. It reminds us that science is not just about the ideas, but also about who controls those ideas, who has the power to shape the narrative, and who gets left behind. It is a stark reminder of how often history is written by those who are already in power, and how inconvenient truths are sometimes buried beneath layers of political and professional maneuvering. What does this mean for us today? It means that, as we celebrate the great minds of our time, we must also be vigilant in ensuring that we don't repeat the same mistakes. We need to foster an environment where ideas can thrive, regardless of where they come from or who presents them. We need to create spaces in science and society where every voice, every discovery, is given its due recognition, no matter how disruptive it might seem. His story also serves as a warning about the dangers of erasure. In a world that's constantly evolving, we must remember that the contributions of the past shape the future. If we fail to acknowledge those who paved the way, we risk losing valuable lessons and insights. The forgotten scientist may have been pushed aside, but his legacy, his work, continues to save lives and transform medicine. That, ultimately, is what we must hold on to: the enduring power of ideas, no matter whose name is attached to them.